If your life is meaningless, well, you're not pursuing a valued goal. I mean, you might be depressed too, and sometimes that can be like an illness, something that is really wrong with you. But a good rule of thumb is that if you find no joy in life, there's a very low probability that you're pursuing a goal that you regard intrinsically, like in the depths of your temperament, as worthwhile. And that's technically true because we do, in fact, experience most of the positive emotion, let's say, that's associated with emotions like joy. We experience that in relationship to a goal. So, well, then you want to find a goal that regulates your negative emotion and that brings you a certain amount of positive emotion and that expands your competence as you pursue it. And you will experience that as meaningful. That's really what meaning signals. Meaning signals you're doing all those things. You say, well, that's not real. It's like, don't listen to the semantic chatterbox so much, right? There's levels of you that are far wiser than that. And you can watch what happens to you instead of noticing what you think, and that's another thing I always did with my clients, especially if they're depressed. It's like, well, let's watch you for a week and let's see when you're not so depressed. What are you doing when you're not so depressed? Now, for some people who had an endogenous depression, they were just depressed all the time. And sometimes an antidepressant was a good solution to that. But for people who were situationally depressed, which is equally common, let's say, there'd be quite a bit of variation in their mood. And say, well, it turns out that I'm not so depressed when I'm with so-and-so. It's like, okay, well, why? And more importantly, how can we do more of that? And when were you more depressed? Well, when I'm alone in my room, brooding. Okay, well, how about you spend 10% less time this week alone in your room? Like, we'll introduce 10%, let's say. So you're awake for 16 hours, so that's an hour. Now we'd probably go for 5%, half an hour. That's a hell of an improvement over 20 weeks, right? Because that would be 100% less time doing counterproductive brooding. I'm really on the side of the person that wants to do something positive with their life, to make their own life better, because I think that's where you should start. You should start by maximizing the quality of your own life. That's not a selfish thing, or if it is, it's the right kind of selfishness. And that you should figure out how to do that in a way that's of benefit to your friends and your family and your community. And you should take that deadly seriously. And the reason you should do that is because that just makes life better for everyone. And it reduces a fair bit of the misery that would otherwise be part and parcel of life, and it makes everything function smoothly. And one of the things I'm really curious about is what the world would be like if everybody decided to do that, because human beings are really remarkable creatures, and we hobble ourselves very badly with deception and resentment and revenge and the desire to make things worse and arrogance and all those sins, let's say, that make us deviate from our true path. And our true path should be something like, imagine the noblest aim that you can conceptualize and then sacrifice your life to attempting to attain it. And there's nothing in that isn't good for everyone. And so, apart from the fact that it requires a lot of responsibility, I just can't see why everyone wouldn't do that. And when I'm talking to young people and, shaking my finger and saying, grow the hell up and get mature and take on some responsibility, I'm not saying that because I'm an enemy of the person. I'm saying it because I'm the best friend of the part of them that would really like to walk in the light. And it's an invitation to walk in the light. And it would be remarkable. This is what we need to do, as far as I'm concerned, not only in the West, but in the world at large, but maybe in the West first, is we have to consciously decide that we're going to do everything we can as individuals to walk in the light, and to regard that as a noble and heroic endeavor, and to make that first and foremost in our lives. And that's what we should be educating young people to do, and they can do that. And so I have dozens of people writing to me and talking to me all the time who are saying the same thing. They're saying, look, I've really been trying to get my act together over the last 6 months. I've been trying not to lie, which is slightly different than trying to tell the truth, right? It's a more humble goal to not lie, because you can tell when you're lying, but you can't necessarily tell when you're telling the truth. And I've been coming up with a plan, and I've been trying to discipline myself, and I've been cleaning up my room, which is like a nice humble act that involves transforming chaos into order. And they write and say, God, things are just working out way better for me. It's like, whoa, do it, man. That's just, you keep that up for 15 years and you'll be unbeatable. And that's what we should be
convincing young people to be is to be unbeatable.
If you're not doing what you want to do or what you think you should be doing, drop the presumption that you know who you are and start to negotiate with yourself like you're a stranger who needs to be enticed forward. Because you don't know who you are, especially if you're not able to regulate your behavior, because that's evidence that you don't know who you are. Something is driving the ship. It's not you, or it's not the you think you are. And that's often extremely humiliating to people, because you may have to pick a goal that's so low, so lowly, right, that you embarrass yourself half to death by recognizing the necessity of you having to practice that. But the upside of that is that improvement, incremental improvement, scales exponentially. So even if you have to start somewhere really trivially, man, once you start, you can really scale up quickly. And so, and with an exponential increase, which I think improvement is, the trajectory of improvement is characterized by a power law function. It doesn't really matter where you start if you're doubling. Look, think you get 1% better a week. That's not that high a goal, right? Maybe you could get rid of 1% of your stupidity and malevolence a week, or maybe every 2 weeks. Because that compounds in 3 years, you are a completely different person. And it doesn't end there. So even if you're starting with, the horrible mixed bag of catastrophes that you actually are, if you're diligent in your attempts to rectify your errors and to aim higher, man. And then with regards to your goals, let's say you don't know what to do. Well, maybe you're high in openness, and so you're pulled in all sorts of directions, or maybe you're low in conscientiousness, or you're confused because you're anxious, or you haven't had any direction, you haven't had good mentoring, etc., etc. There's lots of reasons. Well, I would say, pick something, right? Pick something, a nameable goal, and then try to implement it. And what'll happen is, you'll learn a lot by trying to implement it. And one of the things you might learn is what a slightly better goal might be. Because if you try something diligently and you succeed or you fail, you're going to learn from the effort expended in the detailed implementation of the goal is going to inform you. It'll also transform you physiologically. It does that at a very basic level, neurophysiological level. You will be slightly different as a consequence of the attempt. And what that'll mean is that the next goal you pick will be a little more suited to you. And so it's this kind of pathway, right? It's like maybe the goal you should be attaining is here, but you don't know that because you're clueless. And so you aim there. Well, it's better than there. And it's not nothing. It's not cessation of movement. And, if you're supposed to go there and you go here, but you walk diligently towards it, you're a little closer once you get to here than you were here. And it's this oscillating self-corrective process that leads you to the final star. And you have to be willing to engage in erroneous experimentation to manage that. But it is a self-correcting process. And so one of the things I always talk to my clients about is, well, let's try something, and we'll reserve to ourselves the right to alter our trajectory. And then I would use as a corrective there, because you might say, well, how do you know when you're not just giving up, right? Instead of thinking maybe you need a different goal. And I would say, well, you can, if you're really concerned about your proclivity for self-deception, you can enter into a contract with yourself that you won't replace any goal you've set with a goal that's easier. And so you can switch your goal, but it has to be a little harder so that you check yourself against that tendency to withdraw and avoid and be self-deceptive. And that works like a charm. And if you do that with some degree of diligence, your goals will get better and more attainable, and you'll get happier too, because you don't experience happiness except in relationship to a goal.
If you're feeling oppressed at work, or you're oppressed in your life, or you're oppressing yourself, then you got to notice that you're feeling oppressed. Then you have to notice that you're feeling resentful and angry and bitter, and maybe even like Cain in the story of Cain and Abel, because Cain is sort of the archetypal bitter man. And then you have to decide what it is that you need to do in order to remove from yourself that bitterness. And that usually means that there's something that you have to say. And then you have to say it because your soul depends on it. And not only does your soul depend on it, I would say the fate of the world depends on it. Because, you might be wrong, and then you should be straightened out. Maybe you're just being whiny and you have to talk to somebody about that. But it may be that you're actually detecting something wrong, some tyranny that's directed towards you and other people, and it's like your moral obligation to speak up about it. And so many workplaces become toxic, to use a terrible cliche, because the people in them won't speak up for what they actually want, or they speak up too late and then they're all twisted up about it, and they're torturing other people because they're so unhappy, and so forth and so on.